Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings as we still have rain warnings issued for tomorrow. As we've got some very heavy rain pushing in from the west with a big low pressure system. We'll look at the UKV, look at the precipitation and the temperature for the next 5 days, looking at that precipitation band tomorrow in a lot of detail. Big warm sector coming, so it's going to be very mild tomorrow, but very drizzly, cloudy, and with periods of very heavy rain as well. But as we head through the rest of the week into the weekend, it will be turning quite considerably colder, back towards average, if not below average, for many areas, with a return to wintriness widely over the higher ground and could be to low-lying areas in the north as well. As we're into the medium range, though, as we look at the GFS, GM, ECMWF, and the ensembles, it looks pretty bang on now that we will be going quite cold towards the middle of the month. No major blocking spell, nothing like we saw in early December, but we're at peak winter now, so the air masses to our north are at the coldest they will be all year round. So whenever we do get a bit of a north or northwesterly wind, it is going to be pumping in a cold air mass in. And that looks quite likely to be happening towards the weekend and next week, with a northwest southeast alignment of the jet stream, some more ridging of the Atlantic high pressure system up more towards Greenland, allowing the air to come in from Iceland and Greenland, bringing in really quite cold air for a time. As we see on the ensemble members, it is looking pretty much concrete below average, quite cold, widely, but there are some milder spikes, because low pressure systems will be trying to run along that northwest-southeast alignment of the jet stream, could introduce some milder air, but that is introducing moisture, and wherever we stay in that colder air, we could see some quite big snowfall events in places, but it's not a locked in cold spell, so any snow we see will be most likely over higher ground, or it could be marginal to low-lying areas. So it is something we really need to keep an eye on over the course of the next few days. I keep bringing parallels back to January 2019, where we saw this very similar pattern. We actually saw quite a lot of heavy snow in places, but there were very marginal events, with some areas seeing rain, other areas seeing heavy snow. So we will have to see how it does develop, and we'll look at that in detail in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. And after you start on the live radar, it is a drier day for many, but we still have those heavy showers in the north and west. Some wintriness over the higher ground, again not too unusual, and that will become more widespread probably from Wednesday onwards, but also had just heavy blustery showers moving in. Quite small showers do band up in places, and there are some quite heavy cores in here, these lighter, brighter colours indicating torrential rain and potentially hail and maybe a bit of thunder and lightning. Further southwards and eastwards, there are a few showers around, but it's a much brighter day, as these areas saw the bulk of the heavy showers yesterday. So I hope you have used the day well. It is a pretty pleasant day out there. Temperatures are cold. It does feel pretty chilly as we are in a colder sector, but again, it is bright and a little bit more pleasant out there. So yeah, sacrifice a bit in the temperatures, but I'm sure people would prefer seeing a bit more sunshine and lesser cloud out there. But as I said, there's going to be some very heavy rain, thick cloud, and miserable conditions moving in from tonight into tomorrow. Elsewhere for Europe, you can see this very unsettled picture, and just showing you low pressure is replacing higher pressure over Europe, and we are seeing snow returning back to the Alps. So I know there have been some headlines of a lack of snow, and that's because we've had a warm high pressure system to start the new year, but we are going to be seeing a lot of snow over the course of the next week or two. So if you've ever got any holidays planned out down to the Alps, do not worry about snowfall, as long as you're not going in the next day or two. It's going to really top up quite quickly. You can see already some very heavy snowfall to higher ground, but it will come to low-lying areas at times as well over the course of the next week or two, as all the low pressure systems running through the UK are heading into Europe as well, pumping moisture into that higher ground. We could see some big snowfall events. Now, if I do put on the temperatures, as of around 3 p.m. this afternoon, you can see it's a much chillier day. Still some hints of yellow there, but nowhere near as widespread as it has been quite often recently. It's a cooler day, temperatures widely around average, maybe slightly above in a few places, slightly below in others, but it's going to be widely turning cooler. You can see how it's turning colder across Europe, not widely bitterly cold by any means, but more blues and lighter blues appearing, showing temperatures down into the mid to low single digits, if not towards freezing, as you can see over the higher ground, including the Alps there in the Pyrenees. So yeah, turning cooler, and that is going to be a pattern that's going to be pretty much it's turning quite concrete from around Wednesday onwards, after we've got a very mild day tomorrow. If you look at the weather warnings, we do have 2 yellow warnings. We did look at these in detail yesterday, but again, a risk of around 50 to 100 millimetres in the higher ground through northwest England and big parts of Wales. So do check out these warnings if you didn't see yesterday's video, or do check out yesterday's video to see this in detail. But yeah, could be some very heavy rain in these places. Elsewhere could be some very heavy rain as well, as we'll see on the UKV now. So you can see, if we do run through the precipitation and the temperature over the course of the next 5 days, you can see widely a drier day today. A few showers around overnight tonight, though. Look at that cloud pushing in from the west. Thick cloud from around 5-6 p.m. for most of western and southwestern areas, and then a heavy precipitation band arrives. This is the warm front that arrives in the morning, giving miserable conditions. A lot of heavy rain there, but just widespread light to moderate rain, just giving us miserable, horrible conditions out there for rush hour. It does spread through, and eventually we see something a little bit dry around lunchtime for central and western areas. But you can see a lot of these lingering lighter blues indicating light rain and patches of drizzle that are just going to linger in the thick cloud and keep that horrible feel out there. And there's no let up in the cloud. It's going to be thick cloud all around, and eventually the cold front will sweep through in the evening, giving another spell of very heavy rain and potentially some line convection there. It does look like it's staying offshore just here down the channel, but there could be some inland as well. We'll have to keep an eye on the live radar for that tomorrow. Of course, we'll probably be posting a video before that line convection arrives, so I'll have a look at that again tomorrow. But yeah, it could be some very heavy rain there. Beyond that, though, we start to go into the cooler northwesterly airflows. Snow returns to the higher ground of Scotland, and very unstable northwesterly flow. A lot of heavy, thundery showers similar to what we had yesterday through Wednesday. It does eventually clear through. We see another low pressure system arrive, but see how it's much further southerly tracking, and that's the pattern change we're seeing with that northwest-southeast alignment. The jet stream, these lows are going to be running through Ireland, Wales, and southwest England, and areas north and eastwards of that are going to remain drier, but also in the colder air, and wherever that precipitation pushes in, could see some winteriness with it. Probably not initially, probably towards the weekend and next week as the cold air becomes more embedded, but it could, produce some interesting conditions. Again, that low pressure eventually runs through, and then we see some more heavy, blustery areas of precipitation pushing in. As we head towards the weekend, you can see again, very rainy, but a lot colder across Scotland. And if we put on the upper air temperatures, you can see we are widely now into relatively cold air masses, below average, if not significantly below average in places. And you can see cold air does arrive this week, but not anything properly cold. Still some milder sectors at times before that proper cold air starts to come in for Saturday and Sunday. And for many areas, it will linger for quite a period of time. Other areas, it could get briefly shoved away, but again, that's introducing moisture, precipitation, and maybe some snow, or at least the risk of some snow. So again, we'll have to see how that does develop. If you put on the max temperatures now, you can see this afternoon it's generally average conditions, slightly below or slightly above in a few different spots, but around that sort of 5 to 7 degree mark, maybe 8 or 9 in a few spots, slightly cooler in others. So yeah, generally a much cooler day, much fresher feel out there. Overnight tonight, those temperatures probably won't drop away all too much, maybe 3 or 4 degrees, because they will start to rise again as the cloud comes in the milder sector. And by tomorrow afternoon, look at that, widely 10 to 12 degrees. Really quite mild day out there, but again, it's accompanied by a lot of heavy rain and thick cloud, a lot of drizzle as well in between the weather fronts. So it's probably not going to feel all too warm out there. Even on the thermometer, it is very mild for the time of year. Beyond that, as we head into Wednesday, eventually cool air does sweep back in, and for Wednesday afternoon, you can see generally back down to average, very similar to today, 5 to 7 degrees, and overnight we could see colder conditions for a time, but a milder sector does sweep in for the far south, and you can see, yes, 10 or 11 degrees, but a smaller wedge of milder air there, so perhaps for southern and eastern areas, it's a mild day on Thursday, before cold air sweeps back in again, and for Friday, generally average once again 5 to 7 degrees before eventually even cooler air arrives in for the weekend. And I wouldn't expect Saturday or Sunday temperatures to get much above 4 or 5 degrees quite widely. Again, nothing bitterly cold, but slightly below average, and if that cold air just sits over us, it could slowly and progressively get colder. You see any precipitation fall overnight, then we could start to see some marginal winteriness to even low-lying areas. Now, if you now go over to the GFS and see what the long-term trends are today, you can see the westerly flow at the moment, brief mild wedges coming in at times, and as we head towards the weekend, you can see how it's more of a northwesterly wind coming in with that ridging of high pressure towards the North Atlantic. Again, this does look like a classic cold chart, but because it is the middle of January now, the air masses are getting towards their peak cold for the time of for the whole year in general. Anything coming from the north or northwest is going to be cold. So you can see initially a very cold northwesterly comes in, then we see a bit of a topple in that higher pressure. It could bring a brief milder patch in there for Tuesday for an even colder air mass spreads through by Wednesday or Thursday up until day 10. Cold northerly winds, and then you see these low pressure systems slide in that cold air, and that could produce widespread winteriness. As we head to 300 hours, again we see these more low pressure systems slide from that northwest southeast alignment, for eventually it does turn slightly more westerly with the low pressure running down towards Iberia. Again, interesting seeing that happen. If we do run it back and have a look at the raw upper air temperatures, you can see how this weekend we're into the -5 isotherm, a brief mild sector there. Again, uncertainty how much that does push in. Some models and on-some ones don't have that pushing in at all and staying further westwards. Others have that, like the GFS, being quite a big influence. And then eventually a much colder air mass spreads through, maybe even the -10 isotherm comes in for a time, and then another low slides into that and could give winteriness over higher ground and areas where the cooler air does linger. And then we go into a northerly wind beyond that and stay reasonably cold before eventually milder air does sweep in. So again, not looking ridiculously blocked or ridiculously cold in terms of sort of conventional charts, but very cold in actual facts, just because it is middle of January. You know, you can rarely get these sort of conditions. You're only really going to get cold weather from north or northwesterlies in very specific circumstances that normally only fall in sort of January, February time. So again, this is not a typical cold setup, but it is cold enough. These raw charts are showing it is cold enough to see below average conditions and potentially some winteriness. And again, you put on the potential equivalent temperature because you see how there's a big mass of cold air towards Greenland, and it just gets pushed towards the UK on multiple occasions, giving very cold air quite widely for the UK. Now, if you go over to the GM, see how that does compare over the course of the next 10 days. Again, a westerly flow at the moment. Eventually, that northwesterly comes in for the weekend, staying quite cold. And you could see the jet streams further westwards, and we stay more on the colder side. And eventually, we see that northwesterly flow come in. And then a very interesting setup towards the end. If we put on the air masses, you can see cold, slightly milder wedge, but nowhere near as mild as the GFS is for next Tuesday, before eventually much colder air does sweep in. At day 10, though, you see much milder air does push in, but we're seeing a very interesting pattern here. Look at this, a bit of a block developing towards Greenland. It's not a line to give cold air towards the UK because we've got low pressure towards Iceland. But if this high pressure could nudge this low pressure further eastwards, we could open the door to even colder air here. So this is a very interesting chart on the cusp of actually going very cold with slight shifts in the positioning of the low pressure, high pressure here. You'd want to see these heights here drop towards the UK and towards Central Europe, and then we would open the doors to Arctic air, whereas in here the Arctic gets flooding out into the North Atlantic towards Iceland and Greenland and out towards northeast Canada, because these sort of weak lows are keeping the ice bars in that direction. You see the upper air temperature there, that cold air streaming that way, and generally very cold air just to our north with a mild sector to our south. Very interesting seeing that, and the most interesting thing about that is the ECMWF does a very similar thing. You can see a westerly flow at the moment. Northwesterlies eventually arrive towards the weekend, going cold. Eventually more low pressure runs in from the north, but look at that again. Low pressure streaming cold towards Iceland, and a bit of a block developing towards Greenland. Again, we're on the cusp of very cold air and on the cusp of very mild air. So again, it's one of these situations where it's very marginal and could go either way. We'll have to see how it does develop, but definitely a big change from this flat westerly we have had recently. If you finish by looking at the ensemble members, you can see from the GFS it's pretty much consistently cold from around this coming weekend onwards. You can see around Saturday, Sunday going very cold and staying below average all the way to around the 20th to maybe 25th of January. Again, there's a lot of up and downs. Again, you can see some milder sectors from the GFS, operational run there, others not producing it at all. So again, high variability there. Precipitation does lower, as we are generally, with low pressure generally further northwards for the UK here, and sort of consuming us with more showers and coming from a colder direction the weather front's going to be weaker, but it still could produce some snow in places. So again, quite cold, very cold in fact in places. And again, look at the 2 metre dew points, trending much towards freezing there, again indicating wintering potential. And then look at the new snow depth spikes, a few snow depth spikes appearing. Again, compared to the ECMWF, again, cold, not a strong signal from around the 19th onwards, but still quite cold there for the middle of the month, producing potentially quite wintry conditions. And again, got to keep an eye on what happens in the longer term. And if we just compare it to Glasgow for the GFS, again, you can see slightly below average, but remember, slightly below average in Glasgow is cold because it's a degree or two colder than London is. So again, they're widely -5 isotherms, so expect a lot of snow for the higher ground of Scotland, and even quite a bit of snow to low-lying areas as well, with generally below average temperatures and quite a bit of precipitation. So yeah, it does definitely look like it's going to be turning wintry, a lot more wintry for the north as we head into the middle of January, and could be more widespread as well, and we'll have to keep an eye on how it does develop. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you've enjoyed, make sure you do stay safe. The big deluges we're going to see over the course of the next few days, but if you are looking for something slightly cooler, something slightly more seasonal, it definitely looks like it's going to turn colder next week. Just how cold it turns and precipitation associated with that, we're still very unsure. As you saw from those pressure charts, there is still a lot of uncertainty with positioning and exact air masses, so we'll have to just see how it does play out. So as I said, thanks for watching, make sure you stay tuned, as we'll be posting again tomorrow, and I'll see you again for another video soon.